All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Simplified podcast. Today, I am here with my boy, Alex Tran. He's a friend of mine. You might actually know him if you had followed my channel for a while. He was actually on a podcast a while ago. I believe we talked about supplements. So check that out if you haven't already. But I'm glad to have him back today because we're going to be talking about something that I think a lot of you guys will probably benefit from hearing. And I think it's really just something that most people can relate to, and either they know someone who's been through it, they've been through it themselves, or they really just, they've seen the fitness industry and kind of some of those fad diets out there and the pitfalls behind it. So like I just mentioned, we're going to be getting into fad diets, getting into a little bit more specifics on just some of those pitfalls and some things to watch out for and be leery of as a customer, spending your money, just to avoid confusion and frustration. So I'm going to leave it at that. I want to get to Alex here real quick, let him know, who he is and, what he's about. So Alex, tell the people who you are, what you're about, man, and just give them a little bit more info.
All right. Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me on your podcast again, Joe. It's great to be here. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Alex, as Joe said. I am from Waukesha. I graduated from Carroll. I got my bachelor's in exercise science. Then I am currently enrolled through Concordia Chicago's graduate program in applied exercise science. Then I have a sports nutrition emphasis. I have a few certifications. I have the CSCS through NSCA, and I have the CISSN through the International Society of Sports Nutrition. And that's pretty much who I am right now. I mean, I'm just your average college student. I make a lot of controversial memes on Instagram. So if you like memes, definitely check out my page. But yeah, like I said, thanks for having me again, Joe.
Dude, no worries. And honestly, I think you are underselling yourself a little bit here. He's not just an average college dude. This guy's super, super intelligent. One of the most intelligent people I know personally, as far as fitness and actually being able to just understand concepts, being able to apply it. Like I said, like he mentioned, he's still in school right now, just really trying to learn more and more and more. But yeah, definitely check out his page because it's a very unique take on memes because they're always educational. There's something you can take away from it, but it's spun in a way that's funny, kind of has a little bit of humor to it. Maybe some would say maybe being a little bit of a smart ass, but I think it's perfect. I think it's just like,
it definitely depends on your perspective. If you're feeling attacked or you're feeling like your biases are confirmed, then
you're probably in the right place.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But definitely check it out. And actually, one of his memes, it kind of segues into the topic I want to get into a little bit right away here. He put together, it was basically a Venn diagram, I believe, okay, so it was vegans on one side and then it was carnivore on the other, because obviously if you're not aware, vegans, obviously most people do know what that is. You're plant-based, you're not eating any meat at all, and then you have what's kind of a newer popular diet. Joe Rogan's actually doing it right now, so it's getting a little bit more notoriety. Yes, he's doing it for a month right now, because I believe it's carnivore month right now, actually, and that's exactly the diet I'm referring to. So think of vegans, right? The exact opposite, right? So a carnivore, so just meat, essentially. So it's funny because the Venn diagram I'm talking about kind of, it gives you obviously both sides, as a Venn diagram does, but it also gives you the contrasting nature of both of them. And it's kind of interesting because when you really break it down, there's a lot of actually commonality between the two. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But I want to first just start out by talking about like some of the fad diets out there and just kind of the overall basis of what that can look like and really kind of some of those negatives. And I want to start out kind of bringing up the topic, Alex, in general. So when you think of a fad diet, when someone asks you, okay, for instance, right, I'm going to do some keto diet. My boss told me that the keto diet seems like a good idea. I want to do that. What are you going to tell someone right off the bat just to kind of get them understanding that, hey, just because that works for Bill at the office doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the most conducive thing for you. How do you get someone to kind of understand that? How do you get that parallel to them? Because I know obviously education's a big thing, but most people don't want to hear that, right? So how do you kind of get that through to someone where, you know, maybe it's going to be a struggle, but how do you kind of break through the ice a little bit with someone like that?
Well, usually my first statements are questions. For example, I'd ask, well, why do you want to do this diet? What have you heard about this diet? What have you read about this diet? And what are you hoping to achieve with this diet?
Totally.
Then you have to ask them why you think they have to go with that specific diet as opposed to other diets, which obviously, if, for example, weight loss is the goal, all diets, or everyone knows someone that has lost some amount of weight following some sort of diet. So there's really no reason that one needs to choose one specific diet and follow that to the T, where it's obvious that one can follow pretty much any diet and achieve weight loss, assuming that during a caloric deficit. But yeah, after I poke and probe exactly why they think they need to diet in that specific manner, you definitely I have to kind of, I don't know, it's pretty much educating them on exactly what that diet does for them. And for the most part, a lot of these fad diets or a lot of these weight loss diets, they're pretty much just all ways or different ways to achieve caloric deficits.
And can you explain, just for someone who's listening who might not know, what is a caloric deficit when you're referring to that, Alex?
Yeah, so essentially a caloric deficit means you are expending more energy than you are taking in. So energy being food, or energy that you're taking in means, or is essentially food, beverages, drinks, anything that has caloric value.
Yep.
Um,
Kind of like a bank account almost, right? Kind of, that's the way I like to explain it, especially if you don't want to even, you know, because sometimes it can be confusing for people, but like a bank account where it's like, hey, like, okay, you know, how much are you spending and how much are you actually, you know, getting in? Like, how much are you actually taking in? How much are you making?
yeah, that's one way to compare it. Or yeah.
And it's like,
So,
oh, okay, yeah, because a lot of times when people say that, like, a deficit, it's like, okay, you know, like, so, like, does that mean, like, you know, I have to just work out more? You know what I mean? And that's where it's like, yeah, in a sense, but it's more so a give and take because, you know, of course, as we know, me and you, but a lot of people might not know, we often overestimate completely, you know, how much we're actually burning and how much we actually move in a day. And as far as, you know, how many calories we're burning, we often overestimate. We're like, oh yeah, well, I probably burn a lot. But in reality,
yeah.
most of us are sedentary, and it's the opposite for how much we're eating. It's like, you know, we're like, oh no, I don't eat that much. You know, we usually think we're under where we actually are, you know, as far as the results that we're seeing or not seeing. So I just wanted to clarify. So it's basically the caloric deficit. It's kind of what it sounds like. So it's calories, right? Calories in versus calories out, right? How many calories are you burning versus how many calories are you intaking in the day? You know, and if that's offset for a while, you're going to be gaining weight in the wrong direction. And if you get that dialed in, that's when you're going to be moving in the right direction. So I think what you're getting at, just to kind of summarize with the keto question, where it's like, hey, why are you wanting to do this? Like, are you actually thinking this is going to be possible long term? Because you really don't have to eat this way if you don't want to, and you could still see results. And that's where it's like the breakthrough emoji or the exploding head emoji, where people are like, really? You know, because they might not know. And I think that's a key element right there. The education of, like we just talked about, you know, a caloric deficit. What is that? Oh, any diet I'm doing, Atkins, you know, intermittent fasting, keto, low carb, like high fat, whatever, anything you name, you know, it's going to be, if there's weight loss involved, it's going to be because of a caloric deficit. That vehicle to get there, the diet, is just that. It's just a vehicle to get there. So I think that's super key, man. And it's one of those things where I think and I want you to get into it a little bit more. What can be some of the negatives if you do the keto diet? Let's say somebody doesn't ask you and they talk to someone, I would love for someone to ask you that question, right? Or someone who has any sort of education who can kind of give that knowledge to someone. We're like, hey, you don't have to do that. What can happen if you do the keto diet, right? Let's say I do it, I have success for a month, and then I fall off, right? What can actually be the negatives, both mentally, psychologically, and then of course also with the actual physical results? What can that look like, man? And what can some of those pitfalls be?
Yeah. Well, let's discuss the mental side first a little bit. So using keto as an example, even though this will apply to pretty much all FAD diets, a lot of them, they kind of develop or have you develop a poor relationship with food, where you are pretty much programmed to vilify a specific nutrient or a specific food group. And in most cases, eventually people cave in to eating something that they've been led to believe they should not be eating. Then that can either, in some individuals, lead to binge eating of that specific thing that they thought they should not be eating. Certain individuals may become discouraged or disappointed in themselves, and then kind of fall off the train in that sense. And then eventually just becomes a cycle where they decide to hop back on that train. They cave, they fail, or they feel like a failure again, and then hop back off and hop back on, and it just becomes a cycle of poor food relationships that just doesn't work out for them in the long term, either mentally or physically.
Totally. One point on that. I think that's so key, because if you start to see the keto, oh, you can't eat this, you can't eat that, you have this list of restrictions, you do, even subconsciously, without you even realizing it, you start to see anything off of that list, or things that are, I guess in this case, that are on that list. And then if you do eat those, you feel guilty, like you said, you go off that train, and it feels such like a black and white statement, or a black and white view on things, where you're like, wow, either I'm on or I'm off, and it seems so like I'm failing or I'm doing okay, and it's like there's no in between. When it's like nutrition, fitness, it's mostly a gray area, you know what I mean? And I think that's
Yeah,
so key, because it can totally destroy you, especially someone susceptible to binging already, which is probably going to be most of the people who are going to want to do a keto diet and want those quick results fast, and to see that quickly. But I think you were going to get into the physical side of things as well, man.
yeah. So sticking on keto, I guess there's a lot of individual responses with keto. I mean, for the most part, if you are doing keto, you'll drop a few pounds or several pounds initially in the form of water. Whether that translates to fat loss in the long term, again, depends on if you are in a caloric deficit. Now, keto makes it easy to achieve a caloric deficit because you're eating most of the time high-fat foods, which are very satiating. So one may feel like they're eating a whole lot of food, but in reality, they're not. And a lot of the times, intermittent fasting is practiced within the keto community. So they'll do like one meal a day. That one meal might be like 2,000 calories, and then they'll fast for the rest of the day. There's people that'll fast for days or for 24 hours or up to 72 hours out of the week, and even put themselves into a greater caloric deficit, which is why many people have great success with keto diets for weight loss. But a high-fat diet, some people do respond negatively with those diets. Cholesterol is a topic of interest, and it's also very controversial too. You have one side saying that high cholesterol or cholesterol isn't really the bad guy, and you have the other guys saying that it's definitely going to give you heart disease or something like that down the road. Um, a lot of the times you can see your good cholesterol increase and your bad cholesterol increase, but that might be just due to the weight loss that you're experiencing. Sometimes both LD or bad cholesterol and good cholesterol increase, which leads to a giant increase in total cholesterol, and that essentially puts you at risk for some sort of cardiac event to happen. Um, it's important to discuss risk too. Risk doesn't necessarily guarantee anything bad will happen, which is why there's people that can do these diets for longer durations, and not experiencing anything bad. But that doesn't mean that someone else won't experience something bad in the short term or in the long term.
So, no, one point there, and I think it's very interesting. So basically what you're saying is, with that being said, it's like going to these extremes with the diet. Yes, you may yield results, but there's a given risk with it. When if you stuck with sort of a middle ground where you're doing more of a middle road, right, a kind of a bipartisan view on nutrition, right, where you're just going to be like, okay, I'm just going to eat healthy. I'm going to eat an omnivore style diet where I'm going to have plants included, right? I'm going to have lean proteins. I'm going to eat things that are, gonna keep me feeling good, but I'm also gonna enjoy things that I like, and I'm still gonna be in that caloric deficit because I know that's what's the biggest factor. Those risks go down with doing that middle of the road sort of middle ground diet because you're not going to those extremes. Am I right?
Pretty much. I mean, I'm biased as an omnivore and as someone who
I think I am too. I have to admit
doesn't
that.
restrict anything, but it's pretty much safe to say that when you become more restrictive or more extreme in one diet, there are certain risks that you are taking, and it's definitely important that if you do decide to go and do one of these very restrictive diets, that you are constantly monitoring or having a doctor monitor what's going on within you. So that usually means blood work should be done every few months or so, just to make sure that you are maintaining good health. And you should also most likely be working with a registered dietitian that is it's pretty much the equivalent to a doctor. It's just more into dietetics and all the nutrition in relation to health.
And that's a big thing I want to mention also, because we are referring the majority of what we're discussing right now to weight loss and someone doing some sort of diet like this for weight loss, specifically fat loss. Obviously, I actually have a client directly who's one of their children actually has been on a keto diet, I believe, for epilepsy, and that could
Sure.
right. So and obviously that's different. And one other situation I want to talk about is you're mentioning a lot of people, and definitely something I've seen as well. Like you mentioned, they pair the keto diet with intermittent fasting or these crazy fasting sort of protocols. And I just want to get into what we were describing before as far as the mental side of it. Isn't that disordered eating in itself?
It's depends who you ask. I'd probably say it's borderline disordered eating, especially when you
Or it
get
could
to
cause that, I think,
habits
right?
like, yeah, it can definitely lead to something. Or
Okay.
I don't want to say can definitely, but
It
I would
could.
not be surprised if one develops some sort of disordered eating pattern if the more extreme they get with their dietary patterns.
Totally.
Um, so yeah.
Totally. And I think you were going to continue that thought before I was mentioning those 2 points I just made, as far as the physical components as well that can happen to one who maybe does one of these extreme diets,
Yeah.
especially like metabolic adaptation. Maybe touch on something like that, because I know that's something that it can definitely be misconstrued a lot of times, where people think, oh, my metabolism is broken, right? And I think this is something that you
Sure.
can go into, because especially people do the keto diet, right? You know this definitely. They don't track a lot of times because they just cut out carbohydrates, one of the major food groups, right? and they don't actually track anything, but they're just eating this high fat diet. So, or maybe they just track carbohydrates, right? And that's kind of a pitfall, because it's like, well, you're still not tracking your overall calories. So kind of get into that a little bit, Alex.
Sure. So yeah, for one, the concept of having a broken metabolism has like zero scientific weight to it. Most people don't have broken metabolism. I would say nobody does. Some people might have hormonal issues, which is another story. Most of it relating to thyroid issues. But that doesn't mean that someone's metabolism is broken, and that doesn't mean that they can't achieve weight loss via a caloric deficit. It just means that they might have a more difficult time, and special considerations would have to be made for that specific person, but that would be up to a doctor or a registered dietitian to handle. But on the topic of metabolic adaptation, there's evidence that suggests metabolism can it slows down as the longer you diet and the more weight you lose. But there really isn't. It's not ever to an extent where it just completely halts your weight loss. That is that's not something that can be supported with evidence. There's one extreme case called the Minnesota starvation experiment where people were put on severely restricted caloric intakes, but even then, those participants still lost a bunch of weight, and the experiment has never been replicated for probably ethical reasons to an extent. But yeah, even then, for the most part, there's nothing that really says that you're not going to lose weight, or your metabolism is just going to slow down to the point where you just can't lose weight anymore.
Totally. And I think that's super important. I think this is where bringing up the topic of having an actual protocol when it comes to your diet, and also actual phases within your diet, where it's like, okay, we both know people, and I'm sure everyone listening knows someone who has been dieting for years, right? They've always been like, yeah, I'm doing this or I'm doing that, right? And they just continually are struggling. They're not actually seeing progress or seeing changes. And it's like, you can continuously diet and diet and diet, but if you actually have, if you like you mentioned, you're working with either a dietitian, or you're working with, a health coach, or you're working with a personal trainer or some sort of expert who's going to help you lose that weight and give you accountability, but also give you that plan. I think that's so key, because you mentioned metabolic adaptation, and that definitely can happen. But if you're strategic about those, what we call maintenance phases, and basically it's just bringing those calories back up out of that deficit, which is like, what do you mean, Joe? Like, well, what if I have 100 pounds to lose, right? Well, that's great, but we're not going to lose that 100 pounds in one shot. We're going to probably do, like I just mentioned, what's called those maintenance phases, which is going to help avoid and actually deter against that metabolic adaptation, like you're mentioning, because your body's like, oh, wow, you're giving me some extra calories again. I'm out of the deficit. I'm not gaining weight, but I'm at least maintaining where I'm at. And I'm also going to bring hormonally those, and I want you to get into that a little bit more specifically, because I'm sure you can explain that way more articulately. But explain why you'd actually, because you increase your calories again, your body's like, awesome, yeah, we feel great again. And I know there's definitely some hormonal value there, where it's like you're going to be able to bring, your satiation levels, where you feel hungry, and actually, you feel full and hungry less from smaller amounts of meals and that sort of thing. Explain that a little bit more, as far as why that maintenance phase or bringing those calories back up can benefit against that metabolic adaptation, man.
Yeah, well, for the most part, there's solid evidence that suggests that continuous dieting for long periods can definitely slow the metabolism a bit. So like you said, the maintenance phases are used to kind of, like you said, deter the adaptation from occurring to such a magnitude. A lot of the times leptin is the hormone, or leptin is pretty much known as the hunger hormone, and that can fluctuate and determine how much food or how much calories you want to take in. And then there's the whole insulin thing. A lot of people think that when they are in a deficit for so long that they're just that they're improving their insulin sensitivity from not having to secrete it, or not secrete it, from I guess producing it for too much or for so often, just from having so much food in their system all the time. So insulin and leptin are definitely the two hormones that people tend to look at, but for the most part, a lot of it is just making sure that you are not, or it's kind of just cheating the adaptation system, and making sure that you're not becoming too adapted, where it can not, again, like I said, it won't completely slow weight loss, but it can definitely impair it in comparison to this intermittent break system that a lot of people have grown to use in their weight loss protocols.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's so important. So basically, just to kind of recap there. So essentially, let's say someone has to lose 100 pounds. Of course, there's going to be that 100 pounds that you want to lose the entire time. But it's like that's a very daunting thing, both mentally and physically. So when you're breaking it down, there might be 12 weeks, right, where you're in a deficit. And it could be usually between 10 and 15 weeks or so is the range I find, but it obviously is individual, where I actually have one of my clients, he's around 20 weeks or so now in a deficit, but we've been in such a slight deficit where he's not negatively affected. His workouts have been still awesome. He's been feeling really good. His sleep isn't affected. And those seem to be some key signs where, if you are feeling those negatives where you just don't feel full, right? You just can't, you eat a meal and you immediately want to eat more food. And you start to maybe almost feel some of those negatives of the dieting, like we were discussing, your sleep, you just have poor workouts, right? There's so many things. You feel fatigued constantly throughout the day, even after, like a good night of sleep. That's a key sign where you might need to implement a few weeks or a month or so of those increased calories out of the deficit. So it's a strategic increase of the calories so that you can then go back into a diet and back into a deficit, and then continue your weight loss or maintain the weight loss that you've been happy with, because that can also go for someone who doesn't need to be in a deficit anymore. Because most people don't think about that, and I think that's key. I think Layne Norton coined the term like the diet after the diet. And I think that's so key, because most people don't really think about that. Well, because they're struggling to even get to that point, of course, but they don't even really foreshadow. And I think, like I said, that periodized sort of mindset, or that structure planning of the long term with your diet, and your weight loss phase, and then thereafter, I think is so key. But yeah, it's very interesting. And I know we were kind of not picking on keto, but kind of getting into keto side of things a little bit more specifically. Why do you think keto, and I think we both know the answer here, why do you think keto is so popular right now,
man? Honestly, I think it's just because of the rapid decrease in weight loss that people see in the short term. A lot of people, they're obsessed with the number on the scale. And when you cut carbs out of your diet, that number on the scale can change pretty quickly. And they see their friends losing this weight, and if their friends are doing it, they're going to want to try it too. So I think that's essentially why keto is so popular right now.
Totally. And I think it's so interesting because you have all these crazy things going on as far as different diets and different fads out there where you're like, okay, it seems really great. And in principle, it might seem really awesome, and it might seem like you might see results really fast. But why, as just someone, the average person listening to this, why is like, you know, more, not necessarily better when it comes to weight loss? Because one might say, well, if I lose weight fast, that seems like a good thing. Like, what's the negative behind that? Of course, okay, you know, I understand there's risks, Alex, you know, like whatever. But if I'm trying to lose a lot of weight and I lose it fast, what's the harm in that?
Yeah, well, for the most part, when you lose a lot of weight fast, people tend to gain a lot of weight fast too. A
Back.
lot of people have, yeah, they try to gain, they tend to gain that weight back fast too. For the most part, when you're when you're when you're dieting to such an extreme extent, it's often difficult to adhere to or sustain. And then people, like I said previously, they fall off that wagon or off that train. In regards to keto, they reintroduce carbs, and then they gain a bunch of water weight back as they start to store, as their body starts to store glycogen again. Then they see that weight gain, and then they want to start that diet over again. So fast weight loss often isn't sustainable weight loss. Usually the sustainable weight loss is something that you'll see with slower rates of weight loss. I think people with more weight to lose can have faster rates of weight loss and be okay. And in contrast, leaner individuals probably shouldn't aim for such drastic changes in body weight. But again, that obviously just depends on the individual. Um, but yeah, for the most part, fast weight loss is difficult to sustain, and a lot of people tend to put that weight right back on.
Totally. And I think that that's super key, because that kind of goes hand in hand with what we were discussing with metabolic adaptation. The more drastic you are with how many calories you're cutting, that definitely has a drastic effect on how negatively you're going to be affected by the diet. And that's kind of what I was mentioning before, where I mentioned my client, he's on about over 20 weeks, I want to say, into a deficit right now. And he's almost at 50 pounds lost since August. And he's been doing great. So however many weeks that is, basically since the end of August, which basically would be, it would like August 29th. So basically September 1st. And it's like, okay, well, how did he do that? Well, we don't have him in this drastic deficit that makes him feel like crap constantly, right? Where he's just so low on calories, where his workouts are negatively affected, right? He can't live his normal life, you know, and he's actually, he does theater, he's a performer. So he literally is, you know, doing multiple different things when it comes to his lifts and also just his job, which is physically active. So it's like, he doesn't, and obviously that helps with us with, you know, caloric burn and that sort of thing. But it also helps him not have to diet and go so drastic with how many calories he's eating, as far as being on the low end. So I think that's key as well, where it's like, you know, you can just maintain it longer. And I think that's such a hard concept for us to understand as humans, because so many things are like, you know, you do this and this is what happens. And it's like with weight loss, you know, we think more is better always. And it's like, this is totally the example of less is more, quality over quantity, because you're going to feel a lot better in the long run, rather than, you know, again, falling off the wagon. And then, you know, eventually, oh, is this me? You know, why is Susie having success with the keto diet, but I can't stick with it? And it's like, you know, because you're not Susie, that's exactly why. But it's like, it just might not be for you, right? Like, and it's just not something, like for me, if you told me, hey, you know, Joe, you can never have sushi again, you can never have pizza, and you can't drink beer. It's like, well, why? You know, like, you're telling me that's the only way? Well, no, there's actually another way. Oh, well then why wouldn't I do that? Where I can enjoy some things in moderation. Obviously, I want to care about my health. You know, I always give the example. I'm like, yeah, you could lose weight just eating cookies. I'm like, that's obviously not what we want to do, right? But that's the epitome of what's real right now. You know, like, hey, it's the reality of it, right? Not throwing health out the window, right? Or muscle, you know, but it's like, it definitely could be done. And that's where it's like, wow, like, you know, and I think it's so crazy because keto, right? If it was so magical, I think, I'm totally blanking on his name right now, but you might know who I'm talking about. He's a fat loss doctor. He basically just was talking. Spencer, how do you say his last name?
Nadolski?
Yeah, something like that. We're probably saying it wrong. But he just made the post I was talking about. He's like, if keto's so magical, right? Why are the obesity rates still rising? Right? If keto's everywhere, right? It's this magical thing, or whatever fad diet it is, right? It's like, why is the obesity rate still rising? Well, I think because it's just a misunderstanding. And also, which is what I've been focusing on more with a lot of my clients, it's the want to, it's the inner drive. It's like the inner like voice that people have where they just don't care enough to, to make a change, right? To even want to learn, to be able to have, their knowledge expanded, because it's right at their fingertips, right? It's, whether they look it up themselves, hire someone, it can be done. And that's kind of an interesting question I want to ask you. What do you think in this day and age? Because like I just mentioned, there's everything at our fingertips, right? You could find out every single different piece of information you want, nutrition, workout wise, diets. You could listen to the podcast, right? You could be listening to this, hire someone. Do you think it's at a better state, the fact that you can find all that information? Because obviously there's going to be some, misinformation. There's going to be people who don't know what they're talking about getting out there, right? And mixing in with the crowd, with the real information. Do you think it's a benefit that we have all that information at our fingertips, or a negative because of all the actual intertwined BS and kind of, for lack of a better term, fake news, right? That we don't
Sure.
want, especially nutrition wise, right? Do you think it's a
Yeah.
positive or negative with all of that, with the internet and everything we have at our fingertips, man?
Yeah. I definitely think it has its pros and cons, and I don't know if I can say that it is totally a positive or it's
Totally.
totally a negative.
Yeah, it's a wash, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, technology is amazing. Like you said, we have pretty much all the information on our computer screens. Now, how we apply or interpret that information, that's another story. The quality of information, again, that's another story, and I'll get into that a little bit more. And I think a lot of it just, whether this benefits us or not, pretty much just depends on one's ability to remain a skeptic and not be so gullible about pretty much everything they read that's online. It's important to question things, especially things that go against or that confirm your bias. It's important to try to prove things that you believe are wrong, and that's essentially where the learning comes in. Now, with the advancements in social media, that has been both great and not so great. There's people who have a very large following that produce high quality, evidence-based information for the people that read their stuff. In contrast, social media has given people who don't know what they're talking about a platform to spread misinformation. And honestly, and unfortunately, that misinformation goes a long way, especially if someone has higher levels of education. People are just more likely to take that information as gold and run with it, even if it's not correct. So I'd say it's definitely hard to say whether or not this rise in technology has been beneficial for us. I think it definitely has, and I think it has potential to be great, but it definitely comes with a downside. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And I think the big thing you mentioned there is like educating yourself. And obviously that's so easy to say because it's like, okay, well, I could just go educate myself, or thinking I'm educating myself, but I'm really just absorbing misinformation and being misguided and pushing myself to one side. And I think it's like, I always describe it, and I think it's so key. It's just like politics, fitness, because in nutrition and different things like that, because you could just go to one side, you could only think about one way of doing things. And yes, it probably gets the job done right at the end of the day. But it really doesn't give you the whole picture of like, oh, I actually am learning the underground of like what actually matters, the foundation of things, because that's really the key. And then instead of just absorbing it from one side and just pigeonholing yourself, I think that's so key. But like I was mentioning, I think making yourself aware, but making yourself aware, like you mentioned, and I think you're going to get into it, about the quality of what you're actually looking at, and learning about, like, educating yourself on what is quality. I think that's so key, right? Don't just educate yourself. Don't just
Yeah.
type in, nutrition, but it's like learning, okay, I can go here if I want to learn more. It's like, where can I go? What people do I actually want to go to? And even then, like, why don't I just learn from all sorts of different people that are maybe different viewpoints of things, so I can kind of, right? Like, heaven forbid, actually develop my own opinion. And it's cool
I know.
because, you can learn from a lot of people, and then, actually, use your own actual anecdotal evidence, whether you're a coach, whether you're someone who works with people or not, or you just trial and error on yourself. So I think that's so key. But yeah, I think that's so big, like learning how to educate yourself on what is credible. That's so important, and kind of get into that, because it's like Alex, like, I follow 3 different doctors. This one guy, he's a medical doctor. He tells me I have to cut out carbohydrates no matter what, right? Or that insulin's the problem, right? Like, it's not calories. I think you guys are lying. I don't think you even know what you're talking about right now. He's a doctor. You guys aren't doctors. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
what do you say to that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, learning how to educate yourself on what is credible, or what or who is credible, is one thing, but I also think that's easier said than done.
Yes.
To be honest, a lot of people just don't know where to start when it comes to learning what is credible and what is not. And often they appeal to authority, and they will just go with what whoever has the best credentials are saying. And as you know, that's not always the most accurate information that you're receiving from these individuals who have such prestigious credentials, even if they are medical doctors or doctors of some field. Um, but yeah, I think even if one were to attempt to figure out what is or what is not a credible source, it can be tricky. I mean, for the most part, if you were to just do like a simple Google search and ask what is credible information, you can probably find, or at least be put in the right direction into figuring out what source of information you should take a grain of salt from, or what information you should treat with more respect. Um, but that also comes down to people even taking the time to wanting to figure that out. Most of the time, people don't even care. I would assume most people don't even care to figure out what is credible
Yes.
sources versus what is
Just give me the
not.
results, Alex. I just want results. That's it.
Pretty much, they just want things that will confirm all their biases and then have it at that. But
Yeah, no, and I think, sorry to interrupt you, but I think John Goodman says something, and he's like, you really have to, like, meet people where they are, right? And he's like basically referring to the fact that himself, right? If you sat down and said to someone, right, like, how do you do your coaching, right? How do you coach someone if they're trying to lose a lot of weight, or like trying to build muscle, change their life, build their dream body? Well, he's like, I'm going to give them the straight answers. I'm going to give them the science. I'm going to give them, what they want. But I'm also going to give them what they want to get them to what they need to hear, right? And it's like basically referring to marketing a lot of times, right? Where sometimes
yeah,
even someone who's like you, where you're really science-based, right? You know exactly what you're talking about. You're going to go off basic principles that science gives you, but then you're going to, apply your own, research, apply your own sort of anecdotal evidence that you've experienced with yourself, with your clients. That's science-based coaching, right? That's evidence-based coaching. But it's like, for him, to be able to understand that, and like, it's one of those things where, it's so I don't know, it's kind of, I lost my train of thought basically, but it's one of those things where, overall, I think if you have that science-based sort of mindset with your coaching, you can learn from that. And it's one of those things where, overall, as a coach and an individual who uses that sort of that research, you really have that back knowledge for yourself that you can rely on, so you don't have to, just play these guessing games, or know, like, hey, like, is this just something that I'm, kind of going off the whim on, right?
Yeah.
You have core principles that you can go with, but I think what you're mentioning is kind of with, like, back to I know exactly but I lost my train of thought, like I said, but John Goodman mentioning, like, really, again, with your clients, you have that core based principles, but you also understand that someone who is the average person maybe can't be persuaded by the science, right? But they can be persuaded by someone just saying, hey, I can help you lose 50 pounds, right? You're not going to say to them, but it's going to take a strategy, right? That's going to be planned out, right? We're going to take maintenance phases. Oh, by the way, this is what a maintenance phase, like, you're going to overwhelm the crap out of them before you even get them to a place where they're just like, yeah, I just want to lose a bunch of weight. You know what I mean? So that's where I think it's so, the psychology of humans and the behavior behind things is so much more of the point, to get them to be to a point where they care about the why, so that they're more bought in and they're like, oh, okay, this is why we're doing everything we're doing. But anyways, sorry. I'm glad I got that point out, because I was like, where did
Yeah, no,
I know
it's
I'm
good.
going somewhere with this, but it's like, it's so interesting, because you have to have those core values, but with marketing, to be able to even help people, it's like, you, as someone who knows what they're doing, right? I would want you 1,000 times to work with any one of my family members, any one of my friends, right? Like, I would feel comfortable with that. So I would want you to do a little bit of marketing that maybe to you feels a little bit off brand, a little bit, right? To market like 20 pounds in 90 days, right? Or whatever that is. But
Yeah.
you actually give them what matters, because the sleazy salesman who doesn't know what they're talking about and is going to give them, some BS, they're going to market the crap out of it. And it's like, that's such a weird, it's obviously, you get what I'm coming from? I think it's like a weird concept, but it's like, that person is going to help, and I'm doing air quotes right now, that person is going to help, those people out there before you do, just because they were the loudmouth who gets there. And it's like, obviously that's, that's the fine line you have to ride as a science-based individual, someone who actually wants to help people, actually has their best interest in mind. It's like, how do I get actually to work with these people and get them to kind of like come from the dark side, right? Or not go to the dark side,
Yeah.
I don't know. That was just a thought I've been having lately, where it's like, it's so interesting with marketing and stuff. I was always so timid, you know what I mean? And I think we can both relate to that, because, we don't want to be like, we respect the people in the field, right? We both know that there's nothing worse than ruining your image, right? And that's, like I said, there's definitely that fine line, but it's like, well, hey, I also know my core values as a coach, right? I know what I can do. So it's like, why wouldn't I be the one, right, who's kind of just like, hey, hey, does anyone need my help? Like, let's do this, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, like I said, it's that fine line, but I don't know. I think that's so key, because I think more people like you and me, and people who just really, like I said, actually want to help people and, know what they're talking about, they need to work with more people, you know what I mean? And it needs to not be the people, the keto coach, right? or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, and I keep hating on keto, but it's like, that just seems like we're talking about, just give me the results. I don't care how I get it. There's risks, whatever, right? Like, I think that just needs to be so far from the mindset of what most people feel, and it isn't, unfortunately.
Yeah. I agree.
So, but anyways, man, I don't know. I think this was solid, dude. Is there anything else you want to kind of close out with, or like anything you want to leave the people with, as far as just maybe a take home point that, it's like, if you get anything else out of this, like, on this.
Yeah. No, I guess kind of to cap it off, pretty much the main points or key points of this are, you probably should, if you were to choose a diet, at least choose something that isn't so restrictive or so extreme, because you probably won't be able to sustain that in the long term. You probably will develop some sort of dysfunctional relationship with your diet that won't get you anywhere, and it could get you in worse places than where you started. And it's probably best to at least attempt to determine what information is credible versus what is not credible, and to question a lot of what you hear or what you read, um, even the information that you think is correct. It's always important, or I guess the information that fits your bias. It's incredibly important to question that information, because, like I said, that's where the real learning takes place, and that's where you will pretty much find the answer to whatever question you might have. Um, so yeah, that's all I've got, Joe. Unless you've got more.
No, dude, I think that's perfect. And I think honestly, that's a great way to kind of sum it up. I think it's like I was mentioning, really about educating yourself and being like self-aware enough to just, like you said, ask yourself, hey, is this my own bias? Is this, is this person that I'm learning from, or the website or whatever that may be, are they just confirming their own bias, right?
Yeah.
Why do I, want to give someone my money? Why do I think this wrap or this supplement or this detox tea, we didn't even get into any of that. Why do these crazy things that maybe, like, I think a good way to sum it up is anything too good to be true, any of those things, it probably, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? So it's like, think about it from the perspective of, you didn't get to the place you're unhappy with in just, one day, 2 days, a month, a few months. And it's not going to take you just a week, 2 weeks, a month, a few months to get out of that place you're unhappy with. So it's like, think of it that way, right? Like most things in life, like as the saying says, it's so cliche, but it's like most things in life, right, that are worthwhile don't come easy, right? It takes effort. And that's totally the case, especially the things that last. It's like, who cares if you lose 30 pounds? You lose 30 pounds in 30 days, right? Something ungodly, right? Something ridiculous. But you end up right back at square one. I always give that analysis to my clients. I'm like, what if we did this, in a different way? Hey, maybe we only lose 20 pounds, right? But it's sustainable. You learn how you did it. You understand, you're not left in the dark, or you're not left frustrated back at square one after 6 months. That's the biggest thing that I think people need to realize and really foreshadow to themselves, because we're so immediate with what we want. When I was just talking today, I mentioned on one of my Facebook posts about those small daily habits and just really creating those and really focusing on those. So I think, it's one of those things where it's like, whether you hire a coach, whether whether it's me, you, someone who really knows what they're talking about, talk with them, get an understanding of how they do things, right? If you want to do it on your own, well, great. But understand that it's going to take a little bit of knowledge and take a little bit of really trial and error to even see, hey, is this even credible knowledge? But I think if you're listening to this podcast, especially to this point, you're already on the right track with who you're listening to and making sure that you're on the right track as far as just getting the results that you want. Because I know there's tons of people, especially that follow you, I know that follow me, that literally just take the research and take the knowledge that others like ourselves put out there, and they apply it to their own journey because they're self-aware and they're self-disciplined enough to be able to do it. But some people, they need a coach and they need that guidance and they want that. And I think anyone can benefit from that as well, myself included. So anyways, I think that's, like I said, that sums things up. This was awesome, man. And honestly, I'm really glad that you're on here again. Like I said, more people need to know who you are, need to follow you for some good laughs, but also for some good information.
Thanks,
And so
Joe.
definitely, yeah, bro. And honestly, like I said, we're going to do this again because I think this was a good topic. We can do a lot more as far as anything you guys want to hear. Please drop it below as far as comments, shoot me a message, and definitely just let us know if there's anything, like I said, you want to specifically have us talk about. So anyways, guys, go follow Alex. If you're not, I'm going to drop all his info below. But otherwise, for Alex and for myself, thank you for listening, especially if you still are. And make sure you subscribe and also drop a like. It really helps us out. And also turn on that notification bell, especially if you're on YouTube right now, because that'll help notify you when I am dropping a new video and every time I do drop a new video. So thank you for listening, guys. Talk to you guys soon and have a good one. Peace out.